Today, my guest is Michael Gregory, the director of a documentary about Gonzalo Fonseca, a renowned artist known mostly for his work in stone. Um, he worked on, he was born in Uruguay and then proceeded to work on around the world, but primarily on three continents: Latin America, South America, North America, and Europe. And Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Um, so Gonzalo Fonseca is a filmmaker, is an artist I've been familiar with for a variety of reasons, and my sense is he's mostly known as kind of an artist's artist. Um, uh, Maybe like the author James Salter, who everyone who seemed to know anything would know his work and admired his work. But in the mainstream, outside of the academy, so to speak, his work is not as well known. How did you pick him as the subject of your film?
I mean, that's part of the reason I picked him is because he had been absolutely unknown to me as just sort of a member of the, non-art world public. And I had actually made a film on his son, Caio Fonseca, who's a really successful painter in his own right, and only learned about Gonzalo, who had passed away, in 1997, I believe, through getting to know Caio and digging into his work and his life. And I traveled to Italy where Kyle works for half the year, which is also where Gonzalo had lived and worked, and was just astounded by the people who knew the artists there working there, mostly working stone sculptors who remembered Gonzalo with just kind of a presence that I'd never encountered. I mean, he was brought to life by just these people who would, oh, Gonzalo, you got to talk about Gonzalo, blah, 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 blah. He just seemed like this mythical figure. And encountering the work, it felt like it should be better known. And every little glimpse I got into his life seemed like this fascinating story that you just don't hear anymore. Sort of this fantasy of this world traveler who had an encyclopedic knowledge and sort of lived in the sort of dirt of history. And so I just wanted to dig into that story and get to know what was going on. It also felt like, those of his generation who knew him were starting to sort of drift off and disappear too. So I felt like I had
You
to
mean die?
I mean, die, and also harder and harder to track down, and all sorts of reasons. But yeah, dying is one of them. And so I thought, try to get this story told. And reflecting on the film and looking at it again, I was remembering that at the time of starting to make the film, it was very much then. I guess it always remains with an artist an open question as to whether their legacy will go on. And so the film was an effort at sort of trying to understand how that works and where he fits into that.
It's also, I think, quite daunting to make well, on several levels, but to make a biographical film about someone whom you did not know and who is dead at the time you begin to make the film. And so, what was the process like of finding? I mean, the family had some home movies for sure, but you used other archival footage as well. What was the process like to unearth that?
Yeah, I mean, digging into the archive was maybe the most enjoyable part of this, is sort of cracking open the old wooden cases and seeing what was inside, which at that point included a lot of works that hadn't seen the light of day in 20 years. So, um, I don't remember exactly. I mean, it's always sort of a dance between talking to people, hearing stories, doing your own work, and sort of trying to do this triangulated dance to sort of figure out who's at the center of it.
Right.
I do think there's a bit of a liberating sense of freedom in making a film with someone who's no longer around because you're not kind of contending with their active character and personality, and you're really just trying to, I don't know, get to the heart of it or summarize it or just find it.
Right.
So yeah, for as much of a challenge that was presented by the fact of him not being alive, there was a bit more freedom to kind of pick a storyline and sort of discover a way to look at him and then look at him that way. I think the hardest thing with a biography of an artist is contending with whether the degree to which you tell the story of the artist and which you tell the story of the work, which are often two very different things. And so, again, that's another dance of really trying to showcase the work, learn about the work, tell the story that this person was trying to tell through their work, while also telling enough about that person so that you understand the richness of thought, the background, all the things that went into that creative life. I've seen films that are maybe too much on one end and too much on the other, and it's always trying to strike that balance. At least in this case, it very much was.
And I mean, you succeeded, I thought, fantastically in making a very dynamic film about, as I said, somebody who's no longer alive, and about, I mean, a film about a visual artist is a tough challenge because so much of what's going on is internal to the artist. It's not, I mean, a film about a musician, at least you can see the musician working, and that has a certain amount of enjoyment. But seeing someone sculpt is a slow
Yeah,
would be very slow. So do you have any tips for filmmakers who are embarking on their own films about visual artists? How to infuse it with that sort of dynamism that you achieved?
yeah. I mean, I think it depends on whether they're alive or not. I mean, if they're not, then it really becomes both kind of a challenge and opportunity to figure out how to um, honor their work, tell the story of their work without kind of butchering their work, without turning it into some other bastardized form of what they were trying to do. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that was the joy here for me, at least, was like, how can I articulate this moment in his life, or how can I show this work better? I wish I had had more time with some of the stones. I obviously wish I could have seen him working. Although I think for any sculptor that goes at kind of a glacial pace, a work, a painter could do something in a day, but a sculptor will take months and months and months, and um, that could be its own film. But there was no opportunity for that here. I think what Gonzalo had that maybe other artists don't was this kind of wild connection to history, to deep history, to sort of all of human history. And in going through his notebooks and in looking at his work and in looking at his drawings and just sort of hearing anecdotally from people who knew him, you're able to trace this kind of wild connection to human history, archaeology, ancient civilization, all these kind of deep things. And there's the imagery that kind of go along with it. So that's peppered into the film. You see in his notebooks these kind of renderings of ancient languages and ancient places, and he's turning it into something somehow futuristic or contemporary. And I had a fun time trying to get lost in the dizziness of that.
And I can't recall, did he write primarily in English or in Spanish?
I mean, his notebooks are incredible because sometimes he's writing in ancient Greek and translating it into English or just whole sections in Latin. He wrote very little. I think he only ever, there's one article that was published in Art News in, I think, 1964 or something like that. That was him writing about his teacher, Joaquin Torres Garcia.
Oh, right, yeah.
A very, pedantic, kind of academic, but really gets to the guy kind of piece of writing. Everything else are just little jottings and notebooks. He'll find a great quote in, some obscure writing of Plato or some, you know, bizarre Mayan anthropologist, description of some tomb somewhere. You're just sort of tracing these points around the globe and through history, and he's writing in whatever language it came to him in, and he's reading, ancient Greek, Spanish, French, whatever he can get his hands on. Apparently, his sort of daily walk through the East Village went from his house on Great Jones Street up to Strand Bookstore to see whatever he could find, down to Astor Wine, and then back to his house. I mean, sort of like a limited, brilliant, autodidactic world that he lived in and kept to. And so you can see that in the work, and then you can start to see it in the material that he left behind that wasn't his finished artwork, that the film does its best to showcase.
The film is really rich, and I think you capture that sense of, I mean, he's more than a Renaissance man. I mean, really such a student of history and such a scholar and such an innovator and creative genius. Uh,
Yeah. It's I what I love about him, and I think what everyone who knew him, because everyone in the film, everyone but one person in the film knew him personally and knew him well for some time. Um, and everyone speaks to that he somehow embodied all those things you just mentioned. He was a Renaissance man, he was a scholar, he was this kind of great intellect, but he was also this incredibly playful, incredibly funny, an incredibly down to earth person. I mean, there were no airs about him. He was not trying to show off his knowledge. He was not putting on some sort of act. He was a true original. I mean, he was really just living this strange life up in this dusty loft or in this old shepherd's cabin up in the hills in Italy near these old quarries. I mean, he really chose to live differently and set a kind of brilliant example of that, what it means to commit to your art and also what it means to commit to your interests. And he spent a life doing that in a way that I'd never seen anyone else do. And the film was an effort to show that and his life be a bit of an example of what that can look like and how dynamic that can be. And I still find it fascinating, just the worlds he created for himself by following his passion.
well, you certainly achieved representing that in the film. And any questions for me before we sign off?
I don't know if I have any questions for you. No, I
It's a
don't.
good way to start. It's
Yeah,
to
are there other great artist films you've seen lately? I know you've done My
um,
Architect and things like that. Are you finding that
no,
the
but as you were talking, I was thinking about the play Dorian Gray that I just saw on Broadway,
huh?
which opens with a scene of the painter who is painting the portrait of Dorian Gray. And it's one of the few times I can remember feeling that incredible energy as someone is painting. I mean, it's all a one person show. I don't know if you're familiar with this
I
play, but
no, I don't know about it.
it is extraordinary.
Great.
Extraordinary. If you come to New York
Go to
on your way to
Broadway.
Colorado,
Yeah.
please go see it. It's really fantastic.
Great. All right. Well, that's a good rack. But
Yes.
not films, just theater.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that just popped into my mind.
Okay, of course.
So I'll leave with that.
All right. Well, that's good.
Nice seeing you, Michael. Take
Great to
care.
see you. You be well.
Okay, bye.